first up, and this is probably the question that we hear the most. If passed, issue one would end parental consent laws around abortion and allow minors to get an abortion without their parents' involvement. Sharona, is that true or false?
That is false. The amendment says nothing about parental laws or parental rights. There is a different law in Ohio that gives parents the right to consent to children's care, to a minor's care in general, and then there's one specifically for abortions, and those laws would still be in place. Nobody is contemplating that all of a sudden parents would stop being able to direct their children's care.
Okay, and what have other legal folks? So the Attorney General of Ohio, Attorney General Yost, recently issued his legal analysis of issue one. What did he have to say about how the amendment addresses parental consent?
I think there is broad agreement that this is not going to eliminate parental consent. A similar amendment was passed in Michigan, and the courts there confirmed that parental consent still stands. Now, there is an exception if a minor petitions the court and explains reasons why they are mature enough and it would not be a good idea to get parental consent. Maybe it's an abusive home or there's some other issue. A judge could say that a minor could make their own decisions about particular forms of medical care. But that is a rare exception. And again, that requires court involvement, judicial involvement.
Right. And if you put yourself in the shoes of that pregnant person who is, 16 or 17, navigating a court system and coming up with the money to pay for an abortion, I mean, those are complicated things. So I would imagine that is not a very common scenario. Is that true?
It's very, very rare.
What about the use of the word individual in the amendment? I know that some folks have interpreted that to mean that anyone can have access to abortion if the amendment is passed. Why use the word individual instead of adult?
Individual is a word that is very commonly used in the law. For example, we have the Americans with Disabilities Act. The word individual appears all over that. It's just sort of standard text. If you are referring to minors, you would say minor because that's a very specific thing. Yeah. Individual is just a general word that is not offensive. It avoids being gender specific. And so it's very commonly used in the law. It does not mean minor. Minor would be specifically indicated.
Okay. And what would have to happen to change Ohio's parental consent laws for abortion? Because that, as you're saying, that is not something that would automatically happen if the amendment is passed. The amendment doesn't have anything to say one way or the other about parental consent. So there would have to be action on someone's part. What would that look like? What would the sort of steps be for that law to be changed in Ohio?
When the law is changed, the legislature has to act. And so there would have to be a bill and the legislature would debate it and decide to change the law. But I can't imagine any legislature broadly permitting minors to direct their own medical care. I mean, do you want 12-year-olds making decisions about whether they should have surgery or cancer treatment or whatever? And so that's simply not going to happen.
And politics does come into that a little bit too. So it's something that you would have to look at a legislature and say, does this seem like a legislature that would pass legislation that would encourage sort of a no holds barred about parental consent generally, and in Ohio in particular?
That is true. Politics always comes into it, but on this issue, I can't imagine any legislature wanting to give minors broad rights to direct their own medical care, because that's simply not in the interest of the minor. The minor would not want to do things because they might hurt or are scary. And you really need adult intervention in the vast majority of cases when you are dealing with a minor.
So to be clear, there is nothing in the amendment that talks about parental consent. So claims that there would be an impact for parental consent if the amendment were passed are false.
That is absolutely false. They've identified the word individual and are sort of building an argument based on that, but it is not a valid argument.